This week from the global lane, transformation in the Middle East. Arab countries line up with Israel against Iran. We'll talk to a PBS producer who recently discussed war and peace with government leaders in Tehran and Saudi Arabia. Where in the world? Malaysia. It seems like a moderate Muslim country, but those leaving the Islamic faith there say religious freedom belongs to everyone but them. On the home front, the rise of a Russian Czar, prophecy, and evangelicals. Author Joel Rosenberg joins us to discuss his latest book, Kremlin Conspiracy. An American college says if you wish someone happy Easter this spring, you're guilty of committing a microaggression against Muslims. Campus Reform's Hannah Sherlocker is here to set us straight. And I'll drive it home about a 10-year-old drag queen and Hollywood hypocrisy on sex and child predators. And it's all right here, right now, from the global lane. During his recent Oval Office visit with President Donald Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said relations between Israel and her Arab neighbors have never been closer. That's because many Arab countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, now see Iran rather than Israel as the biggest threat to regional security. That's an amazing change in the Middle East. And here to discuss it is Martin Smith. He's international correspondent for Frontline, and he's producer of a new PBS documentary called Bitter Rivals, Iran and Saudi Arabia. Martin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And you and your team spent about 10 days in Iran, 12 days in Saudi Arabia. You were granted rare interview access for making that film. What were your impressions about both nations and the leaders you interviewed?
Well, they're, as you say in your intro, they're engaged in a deep rivalry, and this dates back to 1979 and the Islamic Revolution in Tehran, when Ayatollah Khomeini came back from exile. He declared that monarchs of the Middle East must be toppled, and he most particularly targeted Saudi Arabia. It was also the case that he was usurping Saudi Arabia's role as leader of the Islamic world, as keeper of the two holiest places in all of Islam, in Mecca and Medina, the mosques of Mecca and Medina. And this was a deep affront to the Saudis and a threat. And ever since that time, and that's what we trace in the series, it's 3 hours on PBS Frontline, and you can see it on the website at pbs.org. The consequences of that rivalry that was sparked in 1979, as it plays out successively in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen. It's a deep and very troubling situation right now.
And I know besides Iran and Saudi Arabia, you also traveled to Syria and other countries. During one recent interview, you recently used the phrase scope of destruction to describe the current political situation in Syria. So what did you mean by that?
Well, you can't help but be affected by the amount of destruction that you see across Iraq, Syria, Yemen in particularly, but in other places as well. But just whole cities under siege for months at a time, bombs raining down, artillery, rifle fire, mortars, grenades that have just destroyed block after block after block. I mean, people have seen of the scenes in Iraq and in Mosul, but also in Aleppo and Syria. And now, most recently, the bombing campaign that the Saudis have mounted in Yemen that is resulting in thousands of civilian dead and more destruction. So I surveyed this territory over the last year and a half. And I was deeply affected by that, what I saw, and just was really scratching my head as to how this all gets picked up and put back together again. And every expert that I've spoken to says this rivalry is going to get worse before it gets better, I'm sad to say.
You know, with ISIS defeated now, it seems the war in Syria is heating up with various groups, Islamist groups, the government of Syria, Iran, Russia, Turkey. It seems all of them are now jockeying for power and influence there. What do you see happening there?
Well, you know, the neighborhood, as you know, in the Middle East, it's crowded. Lots of borders, lots of countries, and nobody's really minding their own business. So everybody's into everybody else's civil wars. And it has allowed Saudi Arabia and Iran, in particular, the two biggest protagonists in the region, to engage in the funding and sponsoring of proxy forces taking up arms against one another. And so that's what you're seeing in Syria. As you say, you've got a number of different sponsors all along throughout the almost 7 years now of war in Syria. You've had the Iranians, you've had Hezbollah sponsored by Iran, you've had Saudi Arabia sponsoring various Salafi conservative Sunni groups. You have Turkey, and the United States, of course, and the Russians from the air, and also various militias from Iraq to Pakistan to Afghanistan. So, there's no chance for Syria to have its own war. Everybody else is in there fighting for a peace.
Yeah, and then we saw Israel's recent direct military response against an Iranian drone that entered into Israel. How
right.
likely is another incident that could perhaps maybe trigger a bigger war between Iran, Israel, and Hezbollah?
Well, I want to think that both Hezbollah, Iran, and Syria and Israel will think twice about having that fight. There's going to be border skirmishes likely. Certainly Syria would like to push into the Golan Heights. It really depends on the ambitions of, I think, the Iranians as to how far they want to go in pushing Israel. They gain a lot of street cred in some parts of the Middle East by their continuing warfare or war of words or actual warfare with Israel. So there is some incentive there. And it's a fairly, as you know, it's a fairly opaque government at the top, run by clerics in Tehran. It's very hard to know exactly what the clerics and their Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, how far they really want to go.
Martin, do you think the Saudis and other Arab countries would join in against Iran or stay out of it if we end up with a war between Iran and Israel?
Well, I think that the Saudis would use any opportunity they could to push Iran back, but they would have a difficult time coming to the aid of Israel. Politically in the region, it would be a very heavy lift for them to do that. So they might be involved in some kind of clandestine, logistical or intelligence sharing sort of a fashion. But the Saudis aren't a particularly effective military anyway, so hard to know. But certainly they would like to do anything they could to push Iran back. Okay,
Martin Smith, Frontline International correspondent and PBS documentary producer. We appreciate you. It's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you.
4 Christians in Malaysia have lost their appeal to have their conversion out of Islam officially recognized by the government. The Malaysia Supreme Court ruled that the 4 Christians should go to the Sharia courts if they want to legally leave Islam. In the past, Sharia courts have not allowed conversion from the Islamic faith. So what now for these Malaysian Christians? Well, joining us from Kuala Lumpur is Eugene Yap. He's director of RFL Partnership. That's a group that promotes religious freedom. Eugene, please explain the particulars of this case and what your client said in court.
There are 4 individuals, 3 of which were Christians before. They converted to Islam because of marriage. And through the years, their marriage broke down. And as a result of the marriage breaking down, these 3 persons now want to renounce Islam and to revert back to their original religion. The 4th person is actually a Malay Muslim from Sarawak, from the state of Sarawak. She, for her own personal reasons, wants to convert to Christianity and wants to come out of Islam and be a Christian. That's the facts of the 4 persons that we are talking about.
Well, why did they feel it was necessary then to file a lawsuit or to petition the court?
over the years, they have made several attempts to have their conversion out of Islam legally recognized. They first went to the Islamic religious department to have their conversion recognized, and they were not given any answers.
Can we expect political efforts then to allow conversion by law?
The lawyers for that case, who is handling the case, is now in consultation with the political leaders to explain, or at least to get the political leaders of that state of Sarawak to consider amending the Sharia legislation. Now, why this is so is because in Malaysia, the religion of Islam is a state matter. It is not a federal matter. So the Sarawak state government does have the authority to amend the Sharia legislation to make it more favorable for in situations such as these 4 persons. That is the political solution that we can hope for. But whether it will work, whether the political leaders will eventually move themselves at the state legislative assemblies to amend the law, it's something that has not been really attempted. But we are still at the negotiation stage. So things are pretty fluid at the moment.
Well, a lot to pray for Christians around the world when they want to pray for Malaysia. I think that's a particular point to pray for. And you have an uphill battle there, so we need a lot of prayer, don't we?
Yes, please. Please remember Malaysia. At the surface and at the front of it, it would appear that Malaysia is a moderate Muslim country. But behind that moderation, behind that modernity that you see in Malaysia, you see the infrastructures in Malaysia is very modern. We are having challenges, particularly in relation to the situation such as these 4 persons. And the constant battle between the jurisdiction of the civil courts, the Sharia courts, the question of freedom of religion, and is freedom of religion subject to the dictates of Islam and the will of Islam? These are issues that we are constantly facing. And right now, these are the discourse that's happening in Malaysia. So we would appreciate much prayer from the global Christian community. Certainly in the days to come, the question of freedom of religion will become a very important issue, and something that will eventually impinge on how moderate and how democratic Malaysia would be.
And I would like Christians to realize that for Malays, not just Malaysian nationals, but for Malay ethnics, very dangerous for them to leave Islam. They're still not accepted in that country. And I appreciate the work you're doing, Eugene Yap, in Malaysia. Thank you for staying up late and providing us with your insights today.
Thank you.
Joel Rosenberg has written several gripping political thrillers, and most of them dealt with radical Islam. But his latest book takes on a different threat to the U.S. and the West, Russia. Take a look.
Joel Rosenberg has done it again. His newest political thriller, The Kremlin Conspiracy, feels ripped from tomorrow's headlines. With an American president distracted by North Korea and Iran, a czar is rising in Russia with a brazen plan that threatens NATO and could draw the U.S. into nuclear war. The Kremlin Conspiracy, from New York Times bestselling author Joel C. Rosenberg.
I see in Vladimir Putin a czar rising again. I don't see Putin as a communist, though he was raised and trained in the KGB in the communist Soviet era. But this is not a communist ideologue. He's not a Marxist-Leninist. He's a czar. He sees himself as part of the monarchy, expanding the borders of Russia to recapture territory that was, from our perspective, liberated from the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union collapsed. And he wants to restore the glory of Mother Russia. That's his stated intent. It just means he's starting to invade and terrorize his neighbors, and I think the worst is yet to come.
Now, last week, Vladimir Putin gave a speech where he talked about Russia's nuclear arms buildup. So how serious of a threat is that?
Yeah, and not just a buildup. He's saying, and we'll see if it's verified over time, he's saying that Russia has new first strike nuclear long-range missiles that can completely evade NATO and American air defenses.
Do you believe that?
I don't know. The man's a liar.
Is he boasting?
He's a liar, but he's also somebody who is rebuilding the Russian military. He is modernizing it. Why? For the very reasons I said, because he's trying to both seize and bully and control his neighbors. And in the novel, this Russian dictator, which is not Putin, but let's call him Putin-esque, okay? In other words, you'll get a whiff of where Putin is heading, but I do it in a fictional way.
Does he ride around with his shirt off?
Well, I didn't go that far. That was
okay.
too grisly an image. I couldn't pull that off. And,
Yes.
But the fictional leader in this novel is planning a lightning-fast strike on 3 NATO allies, the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Why? They're small countries. They're not well defended by NATO, fewer than 5,000 NATO forces combined between the 3 countries. Russia has 100,000 troops on the border. If this Russian leader thinks he can grab one or all of the Baltic states in 96 hours, which I think, based on the experts, one could do, his gamble is, yes, they're NATO members. Yes, they're protected by Article 5, the Mutual Defense Pact, which NATO says if one country is attacked, we'll all come to their defense. But the gamble in the novel is this Russian leader thinks NATO won't do it. The U.S. won't do it. They won't go to war with Russia. They won't risk nuclear war to get back one or more countries that most Americans can't find on a map. Now, you switch away from the novel back to real life. I believe Putin is actually considering this. And it's a nightmare scenario because if we didn't go to war to rescue these countries, these are countries that lived under the slavery of the Soviet evil empire. They are free now. They're democracies. They're free market economies. Christianity flourishes there. But they're at risk. And a novel is a way of sort of raising that people imagining what a worst case scenario could look like.
You get into biblical prophecy here, and what does the Bible say about Russia? How should Christians respond? Well,
as you know, I've been writing about the prophecies of Ezekiel 38 and 39 for many years. This novel doesn't specifically go there, but if you know the prophecies, you'll begin to see how a leader could begin to emerge. But maybe it's not this leader, maybe it's the next leader. There's a couple complications I don't want to mention yet and twists and turns in the novel. But yes, the Bible says that Russia will become a major evil force in the last days before the return of Christ, that Russia and Iran and Turkey will form an alliance against Israel. Well, we're watching Putin build an alliance with those very leaders that the scriptures mention. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not necessarily at the point where the war of Gog and Magog, as it's called, is going to happen soon. But I don't know that we can rule it out either. It's a very dangerous situation. I think Putin is more dangerous than radical Islam. I think he is the most dangerous leader on the planet right now. And I'm concerned Washington could get blindsided because their eyes are on so many other topics.
Well, Joel Rosenberg, thanks for joining us today. Always a pleasure.
Great to be with you,
God
Gary.
bless you.
Thank you.
Students at Boston's Simmons College are being told that Christians may be inadvertently committing microaggressions against Muslims. An anti-Islamophobia guide created by librarians says the microaggressions occur when students wish people Merry Christmas, Happy Easter, or say God bless you. Well, joining us with more on this and some other campus craziness is Campus Reform Program Manager and opinion writer Hannah Sherlocker. So, Hannah, I guess you can't sneeze at Simmons College, or if you do, you better not say, God bless you.
Right, so this is a guide that was put out by librarians, actually an online guide, as a way to help Muslim students feel less oppressed. And by doing so, this requires Christians to stop saying things like God bless you or Merry Christmas or Happy Easter. Now, this notion is completely absurd. Practicing one religion is not discriminatory or threatening to another, but clearly college students are learning the opposite. And it's a shame because the beauty of the United States of America is we have the freedom to express different religions and different speech. But instead, when we see guides like this being put out, it really stomples that freedom of religion. For years we've been fighting to preserve religious freedom in this country. This is just an attempt to keep Christianity off campus. Without freedom of religion and expression properly understood, society at large suffers. Just look at what's happening with the Little Sisters of the Poor who were forced to provide birth control against their religious convictions, or the bakers who are fined for not refusing to service a gay wedding cake. You know, students, if they're learning that any expression of their faith is offensive, they will take this mindset with them off campus, and we as a whole society will suffer, not only college students.
And on another matter, I understand Southern New Hampshire University is giving $20 million in scholarships to so-called dreamer students. What's that all about?
So this is a trend. They're giving $20 million to over 1,000 DACA recipients over the next 5 years. And this is a trend we're seeing from coast to coast. Colleges are singling out and rewarding illegal immigrations. We see this at UC Berkeley. Illegal immigrants are demanding guaranteed jobs from the school. And we're seeing Ivy League schools hiring students to fundraise for illegal immigration. So what we're seeing on campuses are emotion taking precedent over the rule of law.
I'm sure there are many legal American citizens who sure could use that scholarship money. So what does this move say about priorities at Southern New Hampshire?
It shows that we're prioritizing emotion over the rule of law. You know, if we want to discourage illegal immigration, that has to start by decreasing the benefits accrued by illegal immigrating. You know, it's discriminating legal students with legal status when we're reserving scholarships and job opportunities for illegal students. We would be better off teaching the values of the rule of law and actually holding our students to the same standards as a society.
And liberal college campuses are still stuck on discrediting the presidential election that happened 16 months ago. I know Brown University now has a course that presents a different view than most Americans have of Trump's election. So tell us about that course. What are they teaching students?
So this is a new course that's teaching from the Civil War to Trump's election. There has been a white lash, which is white people's resistance toward racial equality. This is absolutely absurd. We've seen President Trump and his administration create record high jobs, and we've actually seen a record low minority unemployment. We've seen the lowest since 1972. And, you know, additionally, the same people who denounce President Trump as a racist or a white supremacist hypocritically oppose his plan to help minority children and provide better school options for them. So this just goes to show that the left would rather hate President Trump and label him a racist than to see minorities do well. We saw the same thing with the State of the Union when Democrats refused to clap for when Trump was touting record low African-American unemployment.
Despite the hashtag #MeToo movement, Hollywood is taking its debauchery and debasement of American culture to a new level. The entertainment industry is a primary influencer of American culture, and psychiatrists say children often mimic what they hear and see on television and in movies. Now, I was astonished recently when I saw this online video of Desmond, a 10-year-old drag queen.
I put on some lip balm, and that's when it began. You can do whatever you want with it, no matter what. Even if it looks like a disaster, just go out with it and it'll look fabulous. This look is a deconstructed Wonder Woman look.
Desmond says he was first exposed to dressing up in drag when he saw a RuPaul performance on TV. To Desmond's parents, I say this: your son seems like a wonderful child, a good kid, but really? A drag queen at age 10? A 10-year-old doesn't have a mature understanding of sex. He's a child. Most parents would encourage their children to be doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers once they become adults. But a 10-year-old drag queen? Why? You must be careful, because whether it's LGBT fashion shows or the entertainment industry, there are plenty of predators out there ready to harm children. Just ask former child actor Corey Feldman, who said this about Hollywood.
I can tell you that the #1 problem in Hollywood was and is and always will be pedophilia. That's the biggest problem for children in this industry.
The casting couch even applies to children.
Oh, yeah.
And while Hollywood obsesses over gun control and the hashtag #MeToo movement, it's doing little to protect child actors and the American public from sexual predators and pedophiles. Actually, Hollywood is doing the opposite. At the Academy Awards ceremonies this year, an Oscar was awarded to the film Call Me by Your Name. It received the award for Best Adapted Screenplay. The movie's about an affair between a 17-year-old named Elio and a 24-year-old man, Oliver. The movie's described as an exploration of desire and power of impulses toward one another. The director said the story was about two boys who grow in the film. Boys? Really? You mean a 17-year-old minor, a child, and a 24-year-old man, an adult?
Nature has cunning ways of finding our weakest spot.
Call me by your name and I'll call you by mine.
Did you know that approximately 60,000 children are sexually abused in the United States each year? Those are the ones we know about. How many more go unreported? Well, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be abused sexually before they turn 18. So why did Hollywood honor that film this year? Why in 2003 did it honor a known pedophile, director Roman Polanski?
And the Oscar goes to Roman Polanski for The Pianist.
Polanski was arrested in 1977 after drugging and raping a 13-year-old girl. He pled guilty to having unlawful sex with a minor, but Hollywood awarded him an Oscar anyway for Best Director. So why did the Academy even allow him to be nominated, knowing that he was a rapist and a pedophile? What message did that send to the world? Despite honoring a child rapist with an Oscar and awarding another one to a film about the sexual seduction of a minor, Hollywood still wonders why the Oscar ratings have hit an all-time low. And I'll tell you, it's not just because of the in-your-face political positions that television viewers are forced to endure. It's also because of the hypocrisy that we see in a time of #MeToo. Hollywood, it's time to stop the hypocrisy. Either you believe in protecting children or you don't. If you do, start acting like it. As you raise your fist and shout words of support for women who are abused on the casting couch, don't forget our children and grandchildren, what's being poured into their minds on the screens, the messages you send by your actions. And here's a warning to heed from the Bible. In Matthew 18:6, Jesus said, "If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." Well, I don't know about you, but at the end of the day, I'm just kind of glad to take this tie off my neck. I wouldn't want a millstone placed around it, or even worse, would you? Folks, let's not forget to protect our kids from shootings in schools, but also let's protect them from pedophiles and sexual exploitation, in words and in deeds. Well, that's it from the Global Lane this week. Be sure to catch us on Facebook, iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, and Twitter. And until next time, be blessed.